Hi, and welcome to Share and Work Together on the intranet with SharePoint Team Sites. We're going to learn a lot about what happens inside a team site and some of the scenarios it supports with how you can work with your team, how you can collaborate and get things done. My name is Mark Cashman. I'm on the SharePoint team here at Microsoft. I focus a lot about what we do in the cloud, but really across what we do with sites, offering you what we do with sites for collaboration, sites for communication, and really the building blocks of the intranet all up. Today we'll focus on collaboration and what you can do in a team site. Where SharePoint fits in Office 365 is certainly a big part of what is the universal toolkit for teamwork, what we call Microsoft 365. There's an element certainly that's very focused on productivity, and where SharePoint lands really is that content service that feeds a lot of these other endpoints. So when you think about email and calendar, if you're attaching a document, we hope you do it in a smart way by attaching a link, and really that's our connection with email and calendar. Is when you want to share documents, hopefully you're not sharing a bunch of versions in a bunch of different places, but you're sharing that single source of truth that's stored in SharePoint, but then you can do things easily like co-author. You can manage the document in its life cycle to take it from maybe an idea in your head down to a draft, all the way up to something that's then published to the rest of the community, and then out beyond that, maybe even into archive. When it gets into broader discussions, we certainly talk about intranets and content management at a broader level, something like a document center or a record center. But really, it's also those sites that you would have to communicate. Once you're done collaborating, you then turn to communicate and get the word out about what your new proposal is or what your new event is and how people can get engaged and informed about it. So we really want to focus on giving you the tools that you need to then better inform and engage across your whole intranet. When you look at what Yammer and Teams offers, it's certainly a discussion at a bunch of different levels, and I'll get into that from what we call inner loop and outer loop. But they're really tools to help you hold a conversation, whether it's a one-on-one, one-to-few, or a one-to-many. And certainly when you get to the breadth of across the organization, how that comes into play with the content to be able to share what your proposal is, what the news article is, or just a reference site and a place for people to go to learn more. That certainly is that connection of how you would use a team site, but then leverage it across the whole breadth of the business. And if you look at what we do with Microsoft Teams, there's a lot of integration work so that you can manage your content in one place, get it into its final format or even in draft, but then easily be able to hold that in the conversation within Microsoft Teams, which is that hub for teamwork. And so to be able to bring in the content directly into Teams is important, again, not to replicate the content, to be able to actually have that be a more consistent experience, but it actually be the same content, so you're not working across versions and causing a lot of confusion. We bind everything together with Office 365 groups, which gives us that consistent membership, a list of people that have the same access to those different applications that are listed above. We also add intelligence with the Microsoft Graph, which is consistently tracking who do you work with, what do you work on, and tries to always promote a best experience, a more personalized experience. For when you're looking for a document, you'll find documents potentially that are relevant to you because you're going to find things that are being created by people that you work with, or are closely related based on the content that you work on, the topics that you're most interested in. And the graph is always looking at who are you sharing with, what meetings are you attending, what groups do you have in common. And it's all on the back end, it's machine learning, but it's to present you with a nice user interface to find things more quickly, to find people more quickly. And hopefully that element of being able to discover things that you didn't go looking for, but they find you. This is all based on the foundation, certainly at the Microsoft 365 level, of a very serious commitment to security and compliance, both things that we do on your behalf and things that you can do proactively to even more securely store content, to be able to protect your information and your IP, and of course, ultimately to protect your people so that they can always play within the boundaries of sharing with each other in a very safe manner, and then certainly keeping the business as secure as it needs to be. So we talked about inner loop, outer loop real briefly. What that means in translation is, of course, there is a lot of scenarios where you're going to be emailing people inside and outside of the company. More directly, you know who they are, you know them by name, and you really only want to target them. And that could be a broad group, it could be a set of people, it could be inside and outside of your company. Certainly that's where Outlook comes into play. In your outer loop, when it gets to the point when you want to share things more broadly, these are things that are more finished, more polished. You wanted to start to evangelize and advertise that something's complete or a big announcement about something that's coming, but you've already gone through the rigor of working with your team. So typically that is where Yammer comes into play and some of the other SharePoint components, what we call communication sites. In the inner loop certainly is a lot of what we'll talk about today, and that's getting into how your team collaborates on different projects. When you've got a team meeting, you want to be able to record that, have people refer back to it easily, that if they weren't able to attend, that'll be right there within Microsoft Teams. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that meeting is for everybody in the company. So it's really published discreetly to the team, and if you need to make things available in a team site more broadly, you certainly can. But at that point in time, when you move from the inner loop to the outer loop, or you want to share more directly in that Outlook space, which maybe you can refer to as my loop, what you do individually. At the center of that is certainly everything that SharePoint offers in the whole life cycle, whether you're working in the inner loop or outer loop. When you work with files, when you're creating news articles, you're working with content. Content could be just lists of data that you're collecting for different projects, for different hardware deliverables, whatever the case might be. And when you work with videos, we have now an enterprise video solution called Microsoft Stream that's tightly coupled to these experiences. So again, if you record a team meeting, it's there for the team. If you record an announcement from your CEO and you want to get that out to the whole company, that's something where you might leverage Stream in connection with Yammer. And all the while, you of course can share links, you can have conversations, you can refer to things. And with SharePoint, you keep that content in one place so that it's managed properly. And it's also something where you don't go through that version management control issue. It's a single source of truth and is easily nice to reference into that. And one more time, everything is referenced with Office 365 groups to give you that consistent list of members who have that access that you want to provide to them. Everybody in your inner loop has sort of the same access. Everybody in the outer loop, it might be a different level of permissions based by nature of who can view, who can edit. But the same concepts are true in terms of it should be really easy to dictate who. So if you look at what SharePoint offers all up, and then for the rest of the presentation, we're going to really dive into that share and work together pillar. But we really want to focus on that whole life cycle of content management in an intelligent way. So when you share and work together with your team, it shouldn't be too hard to discover what are the most recent activities, where is the content, can I share the latest version or the latest asset with somebody very easily, or can I bring people into my work group and then when we're done with the job or that we no longer need to have that person, we can easily remove them so that permissions rest within the team. When it comes to inform and engaging people, certainly this is a lot more broader of a motion. It really is just at the tail end. Once you've done your homework, you feel like you've got your messaging and positioning right, your proposals ready to send to the client, you then can do that and pass it along either to a different team or just move it into a different site for greater visibility. Now, I'll show you a few things around transforming business process that you can do within a team site. Typically, for SharePoint, that's around how do you use forms with lists. I'll show you a couple examples there. But the idea here is to give individuals the power that they need without having to go hire a designer or a developer. That doesn't mean there aren't scenarios where you would go and hire a designer and developer. There certainly are a lot of applications and things that you can do beyond the team that will require that. But for tools that should be for users to be able to create a way to collect information, the way to manage it, and then to way to pivot on it so that they can do things inside and outside of the team in a more automated fashion. That's how we transform business process. And on the right-hand side, if you think about there's a lot of information in documents, there's a lot of information in lists and other assets that you might manage throughout your company. But a lot of what is the IP of your company is going to be in the people that work for you, whether those are internal or external vendors. If you allow people to come in, provide their ideas, share their thoughts, answer questions, there's going to be a whole corpus of content that really is just that, those conversations. And wherever they live, it should be really easy to harness them, to create content off of them, to repurpose them, or at least even to bring people in to ask their opinions and move things along. And again, the underpinning of security, and now consistently with SharePoint, if you've been with SharePoint for a while, we're also moving forward that ability to extend and develop on top of it like a platform. We've got some easy tools for users, but we also have a whole new SharePoint framework that gives you the ability to write custom applications right on top of the data that you're managing, and of course accessible to the people that you work with. So if you look at the momentum, SharePoint has been around for 15 years, and it's continuing to go strong. It's more integrated with Office 365 than ever before. And just a quick look at the number here, we've got a large set of customers, big and small, that are coming in and using SharePoint on a monthly basis, a daily basis, a weekly basis. 85% of those are coming from our Fortune 500, and we're seeing a trend now that a lot more traffic and, of course, use of SharePoint is coming from Office 365, which we call SharePoint Online. 65% of those seats are actually online. If you look at the growth, we're seeing a lot of uptake as far as how much content people are bringing into the service, how much content is actively used. That growth over year is certainly growing at a significant pace, and it's also being taken offline with our new OneDrive Sync client, and that ability to actually bring content down with you offline, work on it, those changes that you make, those roll right back up, and we're seeing a lot more people attaching the OneDrive Sync client and working with their content in that way. And if you do look at what our analysts are saying very broadly about the industry and specifically about SharePoint and Office 365, we're doing very well in the context of Gartner and Forrester in the leader quadrants of 7 of those magic quadrants. And I encourage you to take a look at those reports and certainly gauge the value that they see in what we're doing and how they would then talk to their customers and promote SharePoint and Office 365 as a great big bet for how you share and work together. Just a quick look, I'll have a couple of customer examples as we go through, but just a larger swath of customers that are leveraging SharePoint. Certainly this is not just a SharePoint only slide. A lot of these customers are leveraging across multiple different scenarios, different things that they're doing with SharePoint, with Office 365. NASCAR, for an example, in this space for this talk, built a really nice solution on top of SharePoint using Power Apps and Flow to do a really nice Power App that they use both in the booth and down on the track. And there's a really nice case study if you want to get a sense of how fast-paced and the scale that they work with. If you think about doing the Super Bowl 13 times a year, that's essentially what NASCAR is doing. And they do a lot of that coordination between what's happening in the booth before things air and go live, and of course what's happening in the pit, so that they can translate those things much faster in terms of what's happening, to be able to then make some decisions and work on that change. And they have that power in their hands, and a lot of what they're working on in the background is just a SharePoint list and a lot of logic in between as far as if somebody makes this decision, what happens, and how that carries through. And then for the people who are down in the pit and some people who are just mobile and walking around the stadium, it's a very large surface area that they have the power in their hands because of the Power Apps from a mobile perspective. But I encourage you to go to customers.microsoft.com. There's a lot of information about all these customers, both written and in video format. And certainly if you've gone and read any of those, it gives you a really nice drill down into not just what were the business scenarios, but how they went about them, and then why did they make that decision. So just a little bit about NASCAR in terms of just quote outside of the scenario that I just highlighted. Things here, they don't get a second chance. And when you look at this industry, certainly we know it as the cars racing around the track, but a big part of it is that they're in the hospitality and travel industry where they have just a whole mass of people that come in, flood the stadium, and they want to have a great Tier 1 experience, and the production of it, not only for the racers and the race team that's supporting them, but the whole environment really comes alive, and they want to manage that end to end. And so they made a big bet, not just with Power Apps and Flow for the one scenario I mentioned, but they made a big bet for going with SharePoint and Office 365 to help manage this environment on the day of, throughout the year, and certainly any learnings they can do reactively, very quickly, fix things, and they're prepared for that next day on the track. So we have a few places where people work, and this is one point of confusion where if you think about where do I store my file, where do I put my work, where do I connect with my team? And we just wanted to give you one point of clarity here. When you think of OneDrive, that's really where you manage your personal work, where you have maybe an early draft of a blog that you're writing or a proposal that before you send it around to the team to make some comments, you store that in OneDrive. You can easily share that with people on a one-to-one, one-to-few basis, but it's really yours to manage and you own the content. When you get to that point where you want to move it into a team site, the scenario there is I'm ready for more eyeballs on this. Or initially it's for the whole team to be able to access right off the bat. And when you move beyond files, you'll start to see the value of a team site in the context of creating news, managing lists, building these business applications with Power Apps and Flow. But the context here is it's for the whole team. The whole team has the same level of access to the content right out of the gate, which means the team owns the content, not just the individual. And when you get to a communication site, it's a very common place for people to share things more broadly. And the ownership here is still going to be probably at that team individual or team group that owns the content, but they're ready to share it more broadly across the intranet, across the company, in a way where they want to share their information, get engagement, allow people to ask questions, to provide feedback, and really keep that a two-way dialogue, keep it open. But at the same time, it's also one group ready to share in a more meaningful way when the content is finished. So there's also a life cycle to working across all of these. So we hope you consider that when you think about where do I put my file initially, but also know it's very easy to move information across these or just to reference them. It could be still a document in your OneDrive that's important not to move because you own and manage it, but you maybe want to share it with the team, and so you just give them a window into that piece of content. Or from a team site, maybe you finished your document, which is maybe a reference to the event and some of the logistics or FAQs, like that type of document, and you post it out to the communication site so that people can read it, but you put it in a view-only mode so that they can't edit it. So there's a lot of scenarios it supports, but we hope some clarity about what to use when, that this helps a little bit about where you put your content. But when you specifically start to put in content in a team site, a lot of what we focus on here is, of course, the work environment for the team to share their information, their documents, their news, to build the applications. With context in Office 365, when you create an Office 365 group, you get a modern team site, a team site that's connected to all of those other applications like a shared inbox, a shared calendar, a planner plan. If you're using Power BI, there will be an instance for that group. And SharePoint, you again get that modern team site, and it's just the default team site that's a part of that group that gets provisioned when the group gets provisioned. If you look at then that connection, if you leverage Microsoft Teams in that context of that same work group, that you then store the content, but in Teams, and I'll show you this in demo, you see that there's a Files tab. So all those files that you're working with, that is the part of the document library of SharePoint, really is just a view into that document library on the Files tab, and that's a default experience. And there's a lot of other things that you can do to make that experience in Teams even more refined or more direct in terms of a question that you have or something that you wanted to reference to other people. And of course, within this environment, we have both rich web experiences and a rich mobile app that we call the SharePoint Mobile App that gives you access to all of these pages, the lists, the library of content and files, and of course, a really nice experience when you publish news. We want it to be a Tier 1 experience when you view that on a small 4-inch device, a tablet like an iPad or an Android tablet, or certainly if you're working on a Surface like I am, or a Surface Hub if you're lucky enough to have one of those. It scales up and it scales down really nicely. No matter where your end user is viewing, they'll have a really rich consumption experience. But again, it's also for more engagement. So if they have comments or if they want to make an edit, they can certainly do that on the device of their choice. So if you think about the way that SharePoint is a content service to the rest of Office 365, I've made a few points that are similar here, but if I build a list or I publish and work and manage on files, or I'm creating pages and news, there should be a way to bubble these up. And sometimes it's easy as I just want to share a link, and when they click that link, they'll be taken to the page in the web or on mobile. But with something like Teams or Yammer, we want to start to have that to be a more integrated experience. And I'll show you that, where you can add a whole page or a news article as a tab in Teams. Or every time you create a news article, we actually now have an automated service using one of the Microsoft Teams connectors we call SharePoint News Connector. And every time somebody publishes news, it'll show up on the team site, but it'll also flow in and automatically create a conversation in Microsoft Teams. In Yammer, we certainly have a connection in terms of how people share and communicate both the content and their conversations. Again, this can be more broad scenario. And if you look at what we do with Planner, we've got some direct integrations with how we bring Planner into the team site experience. I'll show you that in demo. But it also is then when you're using Planner, sometimes you attach a document, and when you're using a Planner in the context of an Office 365 group, that attachment in how you think about it in the Planner plan is actually being stored in SharePoint. So you can further manage, share, co-author, do all the valuable things that you can do when you put a piece of content like that in SharePoint. So we like to think of Office 365 as having a content service, and that content service is SharePoint in Office 365. Some of the core capabilities with team sites, I mentioned news and pages. Oftentimes, these are what make up your left-hand navigation. You want to point people to the things that you reference most. You might create a page that says, here are the members of my team, and use the people web part to identify who is on the team, what area that they focus on, and you can easily do that and make that a key component of your left-hand navigation. We certainly think of a binary asset of SharePoint that it offers is lists and libraries, and you don't have to just stay with the default document library. You can create multiple document libraries for things like media, things that maybe have special permissions that you only want certain members of the team to be able to edit, but have everybody be able to view. You can do that at the list or library level. When you think about Power Apps and Flow, that's some of the tightest integration in the most recent year or two, where we've been working with the team who sits in Azure, but the experience is to keep it within the SharePoint experience. And if you build out an experience that you bring into Microsoft Teams, that then also brings that through. So if you build a business application on top of a SharePoint list, you build out a nice rich form in Power Apps, and maybe every time somebody switches a status from in progress to issue or has an issue, that would trigger an email to be sent to somebody, and you can do that with Microsoft Flow. Very easy to set up. All the design canvases are within the browser and certainly are right there a click away from the list or library. You would just choose Power Apps and then the action that you want to take. And then finally, that integration across Office 365, I'd mentioned before, the SharePoint team site is just a part of the Office 365 group apps motion. So that means when you send people from the team to the SharePoint site, or you link to a document directly in a chat format for Microsoft Teams, that they'll have that consistent experience to be able to access it and have it be a more integrated experience, so they're not hopping around to multiple apps, but you're really keeping them focused where they're either already working or where you want them to work in a more consistent way. When you build out news and pages, we start thinking about the different ways that you can lay things out. You can lay them out, kind of think of them as a rich dashboard or a mini dashboard where you can lay out with multiple sections, and you can change the sections layouts as you go up and down the page, and you can leverage a huge number of powerful web parts, both that we offer first party, and if you've got any special ones that you need to create, you can customize those using the SharePoint framework and make those available to your end users. But at the end of the day, you're really just looking at how can I best communicate to my team or communicate broader outside my team, and leveraging that in a nice way where it's not just text and a picture, but it might be text and a video or a dynamic view on a Power BI dashboard. And then also, if you're leveraging Planner, there's a nice Planner web part, and you can keep people up to date as far as saying, you might send out a news announcement and saying, hey, we're tracking well to the end of this project. Let's get a little bit more in this week, and then you can actually see a dynamic live view of where all the tasks sit. And all of this accrues, both the pages, the news, the site itself, the navigation around the site, all down to the actual individual web parts. If you're pulling through a Planner plan, a Power BI dashboard, a Bing web part, a video, and such, when you're on your mobile device, you don't want those experiences to go away. They may reflow just because it's a smaller screen, but you'll have the same access to that dynamic data directly through the mobile device. So what you're looking at here is the strategy and planning site, and this is a group connected site, and you can tell by the way that you can see that we've got our members listed here and a way to link off to that group conversation, and in this context that would take us out to the Outlook shared inbox. But a couple things I want to show you. On the home page, I can create this in any different way that I want. At the top here, I've got what we call the people web part. And this is a way for me to be able to identify who are the business leaders, who are the members of this team, or call out people, maybe they won a certain award and I could put them here. But it's also a rich way for being able to dive into individuals, to be able to contact them, to be able to see who they report to. And more interestingly, we mentioned the Microsoft Graph. Here with Michael, I can actually see the files that she's working on that I have access to. We're in a shared environment. Of course, in this team site, we work together, so I could see a lot of documents. But if she's working on other things outside of this group on her own that she's shared with me or working with in an out loud fashion, I would see them here, not just as a list of files from this site, but a list of files that Michael is working on, and I'll be able to easily dive into that and learn a lot about what she's working on and learn through her. You can see that we've got our shared calendar. We're using the Office 365 group calendar web part. We can see all the upcoming meetings. We've got a big conference coming up. I can see that, and I can be informed about that. On the right-hand side are the most recent documents. That's an easy way to program. Just here are the things that people are working on. I'd mentioned Planner. This is the new Planner web part, and this is an integrated experience, so that if I want to go in, and I know on this benefits review, that's actually something that I should probably lean in on. So I'm going to go in and assign myself to that. So I'm going to tap on Mark Cashman, and you'll see that I got added there on the page, and I'm actually going to be assigned that task. From a news perspective, that's really what I wanted to show you next. There's a lot of different ways where you can arrange news as far as on the home page, but when it comes to creating news, I'm going to click Add, and this is going to take me right into the news article design canvas, and we'll just do a simple Hello World example. And nice thing is you can do a header graph. You can, if you have an image in mind, you can also go out and do a Bing image search that keeps you in the Creative Commons. And we've got a couple of quick starts here since we're talking about teamwork. I'll go in and I'll grab one of the first things that I see here that's around teamwork. And we'll do a hello world with the boat pull. With news, you can also adjust where the eye line is, so I can adjust where the focal point is. And this will relate not only on web, but when somebody views it on the mobile, it'll keep their attention in where I intended. So now here's where it gets interesting. If I scroll down and I start to click into the toolbox, and I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see what's going on here, this is where I can start to think about what content do I want to put on this page. So the first thing might be as simple as a text box. So again, we'll say, hello world. This is Mark. And there are things that you can do here to make this context a little bit bigger in terms of changing it. If I wanted to add colors, you'll see that it gets into the editing pane here on the right, where I've got a lot of choices to be able to adjust the paragraph to left justify, change the color like I'll do here. My favorite color is green, so we'll make Mark green and bold. And then down below you can also see that we can insert a table. So let me just get down and insert a quick table. And you can see 1, 2, 3, and you can adjust the sizing of that, and certainly there are a lot of things that we're working on in that context. Now the other thing, I'll put away our rich text editor, and I'm going to actually now add a couple of layers here in different sections, and I'm going to add 3 web parts here pretty quickly. So you can see the couple of different web parts that are available. I'm going to go in and add a highlighted content web part. Then I'll populate a little bit of content there. And then I want to put in a link, and we'll just do a quick link. We'll give a little shout out to Bing. And then on the right-hand side, I'm going to add a video for Microsoft Stream. And the other thing that you can do here is you can actually search if you know the name of your web part, and I'll drop that down. And then quickly go and grab an asset from Stream. And Stream is our enterprise video solution. And these videos can be 5 minutes, they can be 10 minutes, they can be full hour long if you have presentations by some of your leadership team. And I'm just going to go in and grab one of the first things here, which is London 01. I'll grab that URL. So of course I can have a rich experience here on within the Microsoft Stream portal. But if I paste that in, you'll start to see, if I scroll over, you'll start to see the video coming through. And real quickly, even though I'm just, again, showing you a few examples, you can start to bring rich media or static content like text, or if I wanted to embed a document, I could do that. And I'm really just designing the page for how I want people to experience it, knowing that when they come to the page, they'll be able to view the video, they'll be able to go to that link that I programmed, and they'll be able to see the set of content. So if I publish that out as news, this news is now going to go to the home page, which is where we'll get taken to. If I scroll back down, you'll see now that new news article appeared here. And I'll reference this hello world when we get to the mobile side of things. So you'll see how that flows through down to the SharePoint Mobile App and how it pervasively goes throughout all of Office 365 as part of the news service. So that's a real quick look at the main home page. Obviously, if I were to create other pages like I'd mentioned earlier around a page of here's who my team is, I could have that and I could then pin it over on the left-hand side as an object that I want to have in the left-hand navigation. And you can see on the left-hand nav, we've got a link to a bunch of things, pages, different libraries, different lists, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. So one of the core aspects of SharePoint has always been the document library. And if you think about the history of it, we've really only tried to make this more and more user-friendly and more integrated into the experiences that you build in custom applications or that we offer through things like the connection to Outlook, Microsoft Teams, Yammer, Planner. We want to make that an embedded experience. And a really important part of that is what you can do in a document library, how you manage your files, how you represent them, where and how you manage them through the life cycle of the project that you're working on. And oftentimes this means you want different views on the content. Show me the content that's in draft mode. Show me the content that's been either published or maybe archived. And you can pivot on the library to then filter out and narrow down just the content that you want to see. And we do that with the use of metadata. So if you think about metadata on a file, It makes it really nice in how you can refine the view. It also plays into how people can find the content, either within the document library or if they're doing a broader search. The more metadata you have about a file, the easier it is for people to find, or at least to know that they found the right one. And the nice thing that you can do with these files is you can take them offline. So by using the OneDrive sync client, whether you're doing your files in OneDrive, your files in your team sites, or you think about them maybe as files in your Microsoft Teams channel, all of those files and assets can be brought offline by nature of the OneDrive sync client. It now works with all of those environments. Really, SharePoint and OneDrive gives you that capability to take your work offline. One other core aspect of SharePoint are SharePoint Lists. SharePoint Lists, of course, have been around. They're very modern in the context of today in Office 365, and they give you that ability to collect data, to create views like I talked about around document libraries, that same capability, and the how you do it is the same with lists. But even more powerful, a list is when I have a set of data, I might have 10 columns or 10 items that I want to track per each row. But when I share that with other people, I might want to create a view that doesn't show them all the information. It just shows them the things that I want them to see. And of course, it gives them a different level of permissions where they won't be able to change the data. So I can create a lot of different useful views. And if you think about something like I manage, like a roadmap, I might want to have things that are live, things that are in development, things that are rolling out. And to be able to track that and share that, if I share that up my management chain, they don't need to know all the details of who owns it from a PM perspective and what date it was initially put on the list and whatnot. They might just want to see, let us know when it's launching so that we can start to plan and strategize around the broader messaging at a different conference or an upcoming event. Some of this is also then automated based on what we do with the work that we do with Microsoft Flow. And if you think about that, it's a workflow like we've had for a long time, but now really more democratized in the hands of the end user or the power user, depending on how much you use it, to be able to then take information potentially from outside SharePoint, being able to populate the list automatically based on certain actions or criteria, and then to be able to push that along and maybe do something as simple as send an email or to go update another system on the back end, like a line of business application. You manage what you do in the list or from the form, but all that happens there is then triggered and the flow will then carry off based on the logic that you build into it. And I'll show you an example there. So let's take a quick look at document libraries and lists. We're going to stay in that same environment that I was in, the strategy and planning website that's connected to this Office 365 group. And what you're seeing here is the main document library. So on the left-hand side, of course, it's kind of there by default in terms of the navigation, but I now have the ability to highlight content. So at the top, I've pinned a few items right here, the voucher, compliance strategies. These are the things that I want everybody in this group to be able to see very upfront and to see it first. As I scroll down, partly because we're connected to Microsoft Teams, and I'll reference this when I show you in the context of Microsoft Teams, we've got a couple of folders that are being created. Anytime somebody in the team creates a channel in the Teams environment, it's actually then going to manage the content as a folder in this document library, which is the document library for the whole team all up. But I could also create separate folders. I could, of course, manage the content here. You can see some indicators that I'm getting that this voucher PDF, even if it's the one that I highlighted, maybe somebody started to collect some new information and it's telling me that I actually have some required information that's missing. So in the document library, you'll get cues like you see this yellow bar, but I can also then pivot. If I unselect, I can actually go in and see all the media or all the files that need attention. And when I do that, it's going to take all the content in this document library and highlight all the ones that need to be updated. And updating it is super easy. I'll take this vacations policy, for example. If I go in and I want to see, it's telling me there are 3 fields that are missing data, it'll tell me right there that this property is missing a field, so I can certainly easily go in and apply that missing data. So if I go in and I do it as a Fabricam acquisition, and I want to go in and adjust that content, I can actually get now a much more broader view in the terms of what's going on. I'll select the project type, we'll make it sustainability, add the audience. This one's internal only at this point, and I'll put myself on as the owner. And you'll see this will do a nice address lookup. I assign myself, and then I save that down. And now I've gone in and further managed this content. You can see that it's been resolved, and I now am able to see what actually needed to happen and what it is that I can do to resolve that. So let me go back to all documents. and I want to share with you that you can take all of this content offline. So I've already done this in the background, but if you saw at the top there where it said sync, the first time you do this, you can do this across any document library. It does it by default when you start with OneDrive for Business, your own personal work files. But now you can actually start to bring in things like these documents on the strategy and planning. So I've already clicked sync, so what I'm going to do is show you this side by side. And on the left-hand side, you'll actually see the list of all the documents and all the files. They're the same here as you see on the right-hand side if I were looking at it from a web view. And if I were offline on a plane, I would have access to go into all these individual folders, all the individual files. I could dictate whether I want these things to be offline with me all the time, or if I wanted to then keep them in the cloud, but use them here as reference. I at least have all access to my files, thanks to Files on Demand with Windows and OneDrive, but I'm getting that value of being able to take my SharePoint content with me. So let me show you lists. If I go into the collateral list, you'll start to see that one thing that we have highlighted in the last year is this is a very large list that has about 19,000 items in it. And I can easily pivot down and filter so that I can refine just on those assets that I wanted to see. So now let's turn to look at SharePoint lists. I'm going to go into the events list, and there's a couple things going on here. This is actually a list that's been built out to be actually a business application. So on top of this, there's a Power Apps and a Flow, and I'll show you that. But from a list perspective, you can see here we can manage what are the different items that we want people to volunteer for. So in this scenario, I'm going to go and volunteer for the comedy item, and I can see where it is. I can see what type it is. We can change the formatting with each column, where we change the color, maybe we change the experience behind, but we can also do things with more graphical nature. If something's half done, you would see the column half completed. But as I click into comedy, this will bring up a new form where it's asking me to input information, and we've done this and customized it with Power Apps. And when it fully loads here, you'll see that we've been able to design the use of a Bing map. We're pulling in some information around that list, but also from other lists where you see some of the information from this list. But on the right-hand side, you'll see that we're actually pulling how many people have volunteered for different things and give a really nice dynamic experience in the tab itself. If I needed to, and this is what I want to do, I can sign up for this. That's going to go out and do an Active Directory lookup, put in my face here by nature of how this form was designed. And now it's going to go and send an email to the team that's managing this event and let them know that they have all 3 slots filled up. So both Chris, Jeremy, and myself are now going to volunteer for this. And for the 3 of us, we know where we need to go and the information that we need. And when we're done, that list now has more information. So, assumingly now it knows about me being one of the people that are going to support it. And the list then continues down that flow where somebody's been notified and we'll all get contacted, and certainly on day of, we'll update that and continue that flow. So this is the comedy list. There's also one other list, but I want to start to show you in the context of Microsoft Teams. So this is going to take me to that strategy and planning Teams team. And I'll come back to here to show you a little bit more about Teams, but I want to show you a different list called the prep list. So this is a list that we built in SharePoint and we manage inside of Microsoft Teams. And so this list, Conference Prep, you'll see that we're using that column formatting that I mentioned, and to be able to then manipulate this so that I can either go from smaller to larger, and that will reflow here right in line. I can refine down to filter by only things that are in progress. Those maybe are the things that I want to put most attention to, and you can see how that filters down to 2. I can always unfilter that, go back to all items, and even go and we support the views on these lists. And this one has been created called In Progress in Review, where it already narrows based on a couple of different criteria and will then provide that list view so that I can quickly jump to get work done and to see it in a way that is meaningful for the action that I'm trying to take. And all the while, I can, of course, go into an individual item and see all the properties that need to be either adjusted or just referenced. But again, I'm looking at a SharePoint list fully plumbed into the Microsoft Teams as a tab, and there are a lot of things that I can do within the list. Final thing I'll show you here is the value of once I'm in Teams, I can then hold a discussion with my team just about this list. And so I get a really nice design surface to work with the list, to be able to edit and update it without having to jump back and forth, especially when it comes to asking a question or doing something with the team. I can do that right in line, and it's just for my team It's not for the whole company, and it's being referenced here from SharePoint, but directly in Microsoft Teams. All right, so that was a little bit about document libraries and lists. Furthering more is, what is the mobile experience? I'm going to show you the mobile experience on an Android tablet, but it carries through whether you're on an iPhone, an iPad, an Android phone, an Android tablet, a Windows phone, a Windows Surface, and again, if, like you mentioned before, if you're lucky enough to have a Surface Hub, it'll scale up really nicely. But it's also very practical in the terms of taking your intranet with you in your pocket. And that gives you access not only to this information, like I've been showing you, to the lists, the libraries, the pages, but it's also going to be pulling in news from around the company. There's a new news tab that then aggregates all of the news that's relevant to you, not just from this one site, but from all the sites that you're active in and all the people that you're active with. So we use the Microsoft Graph to represent the most relevant news to you. We hope it also keeps you up to date with people either reaching out to you. You'll get notifications on different actions. If a news article that you published got a comment, you would see that notification. You'd also get things as you dive into the site itself. You might see an article that needs an update or a document that needs your attention. You can go and take care of that. Some of those are quick actions. Some of those will launch you into the Office mobile application like Word or PowerPoint. And you'll be able to keep productive on the go. Especially when you find a document that you're working on, maybe there's something that you want to get your attention to, you read 5 minutes of it and you made a note of something that you wanted to work on a little bit later, you can save it for later by putting a little bookmark on that item. You can do that with documents, news, or pages. And then you can reference those later to read it in full or just to remind yourself of something that you wanted to do. Last thing you can do with the mobile SharePoint mobile app is you can find content and people. And of course, you can find sites. So if you go looking for something, you're doing a full enterprise-wide search that will find people and content throughout the enterprise. Or if you're doing that search, you can do it in a more targeted fashion directly in that team site that you're working on. So that search for content and people, we want you to feel connected to your work when you're traveling or when you're just on your device running around campus or visiting a customer. So we have a really nice mobile experience. I showed you a little teaser around Microsoft Teams, but there's a lot that you can do in Teams. There's a lot of things that you can do to bring news automatically into the Teams. The default document library shows up as the Files tab by default. And you can bring in all of your news in a more connected fashion. Every time something's published, it'll show up as a new item in that Conversations tab. And like I mentioned, and I'll show you, you can have full news articles and pages as tabs and teams right alongside your conversation, right alongside your files. You can reference other assets like a page or news. Let's take a look at what that team site looks like here on the mobile app. So this is a SharePoint mobile app on an Android tablet, and the first view that I'm seeing here is all the sites that I interact with, both frequently and things that I've explicitly decided to follow. If I jump into that strategy and planning site like we saw, here's a list first of all the activity of all the things that different team members are doing, creating news, working on documents, working on lists. If I go into news explicitly, here you can see here's that news article that I created that has a little bit of formatting that I did. The header graphic is coming in. And then if I scroll down, you'll see that it's got the different assets that I put on there. So the news comes through really nicely and gives me a really rich way to access that content. If I go out of the strategy and planning site, the other things I want to show you from a mobile perspective is that roll-up of news. So again, you see that latest news, the hello world, but if I scroll down, you'll start to see all the news that's being published around me. And here's one from the Give at Contoso group. They created a Force for Change, and I can see that this is a part of a site that's meant more for broader communication, but it came to me because I'm active in this site, and I can see that this news article is relevant to me, and I can certainly read it. And like I mentioned in the upper right, you can always bookmark this and save for later. And then where that shows up, if we go back here after we're done reading news, on the right-hand side, I go to the Me tab, which shows me all the recent content that I've recently touched. It's a nice way to get back to the work. If I tap on Saved, it'll actually show me all the assets that I've saved to review for later, like the Force for Change that I did now showing up in the upper left. It's also a way to just showcase my profile. So if I want to go in and just see how am I represented through the company, and also it can also use that to get to files and see the most recent emails that I've been sending. And I can do that on a number of different people. So if I wanted to go in and learn a little bit more about Andy, like you saw earlier on the website, I can dive in to learn about who Andy reports to, what he's working on, and the most recent emails that we've been working on together. So that's a pretty quick whirlwind of the SharePoint app. Let me turn so I can show you a little bit about what it is to go beyond a list in Teams to see more of what happens within Microsoft Teams from a team site perspective. So here we are in the general channel of the strategy and planning team within Microsoft Teams. And we have the conversation here by default. And you'll see anytime it says SharePoint News, that's actually bringing in each news item as it gets published. And to do that, it's very easy. You go into the general, click on connectors, and we've now have a new feature that we call the SharePoint News Connector. And you'll see when it pops up here, I've already configured it. So that's already turned on for us. But to configure it would be just as easy as clicking Add and then going through one step to say OK. And now we have all of that SharePoint news that's being published at the team site level flowing here. And then I can easily go and start a conversation on that new news. And then engage with the rest of my team. But it's nice that it automatically starts that for you. But what does it look like when you actually have a full news article as a page? And so if I load up here a Q1 report, this was published by a central person on our team. And I also want to see this in a little bit more rich fashion, but keep it in context of where I'm at. Not only can I hold the conversation like we showed with lists, but I can actually see the full richness of what somebody designed around being able to see the Q1 report PowerPoint. I can see the Excel document that tracked all different metrics that were represented in the meeting, the main documents I have here in the summary of documents. And then we can do things like I showed you how we bring in Microsoft Stream videos. I'll show you another example. If I get this to play, not only will it play here inline, but I'll pause it for a second and show you can do some rich things around, I think I remember from this meeting that they were talking about bonuses. So if I type in bonus, hit return, it'll actually take me right to that point in time where it was mentioned because the automated transcript was created at the point of upload. But now here as an end user, I can go in and I can review this and I can jump right to that point in time where he mentioned about cash bonuses. And so it gives me a really rich environment to highlight the things that I wanted to based on the Q1 report. And in that Q1 report, they mentioned things about bonuses, and I wanted to jump right to that. And I can do that in a very dynamic and engaging way. And then down here, another use of the people web part, just a really example to show you how that experience flows through from what we built in SharePoint and then to have and hold the conversation around here in Microsoft Teams. Everything lands intact, but it's also very dynamic so that I can go and have that full rich experience even when I'm not directly in SharePoint. Last thing in Microsoft Teams is if I go back into the main general folder, I wanted to show you what those files look like. So we talked about the document library as the default of this group is the SharePoint document library. But the important thing to know when you're in Microsoft Teams is each channel is a folder of its own inside that document library. So this is just showing me if I'm just focused on the conversations and the assets around general, or if I move into something like benefits, you'll see that I'm just looking into the benefits folder when I go to the Files tab. So it's important to know, but if I go back up to the General tab, you can also pin all of the content from a document library or pin an entirely different document library like you see here that's managed by the same team, but it's just a different set of assets. This is the full media library that we call the media document library, and it has all of those assets that come through, and I can see those come through in a really rich way. But this is showing me the entire document library, whereas here in the General Files tab, I'm just seeing a window into some of those assets. And one of them, which is kind of fun, just to see the power of some of the viewers that we have, is as I pull down an asset to view from SharePoint, I'm not moving it from the document library, I'm just viewing it in the context. I haven't left Microsoft Teams, and I'm seeing the rich asset right here, which is a 3D object that I can actually view and play with and get a little bit of a sense of what's going on. If I wanted to start the conversation right here, I could. When I'm done, I close, and I'm right back in to my Microsoft Teams experience. So let's talk a little bit about what Marks & Spencer has done. You've seen a lot of things around how to work in a team site, how you get to be mobile and take your assets with you and be productive on the go, and certainly the experience in Microsoft Teams. With Marks & Spencer, they have a lot of different locations, branch offices, as you can imagine, in malls. They've got their headquarters. And the way that their IT wanted to structure how people had ubiquitous access to information is they wanted to make sure that they set up the right number of team sites and the right number of communication sites to be able to both collaborate and communicate across their whole retail experience. From they have a new idea, they wanted to put a new storefront, a new layout for a different clothing line that they have coming, and they wanted people to be able to add different ideas, to be able to suggest things from the floor. Hey, the customer's been asking about X or Y, and be able to feed that in so that people can review that, and they can all then work on that. And of course, a lot of these people are on the floor, so they're using their mobile device, or they go to a shared environment like a kiosk or a shared computer, and they want them to be able to get in, to provide the information, to get the news and information that they need, but then of course get right back to work, because M&S is not in the information architecture or the technology business. They're in the retail and consumer goods experience, and they want to have more time with customers, and we want to give them the technology to be able to learn from their customers, to learn from what is working, what isn't working, and to be able to be dynamic in how they change, to best work with the colleagues who are right there on the front line, to people in the back office, of course, to people that are planning all next year of what's going to happen, and keep them connected throughout that life cycle and the experience through the different documents and information that they're passing around. So one of the new assets that we have where you can connect a number of different team sites together are what we call SharePoint Hub Sites. So if you've got a number of different teams that work under the same organization, if they work under the same region, or they're all working on similar projects, you can roll them up underneath a hub site. And a hub site gives you that connected experience across team sites, whether you want to have consistent permissions across all of those sites, or you want to have one unified approach to permissions, you can do that. When you associate a team site underneath a hub site, it then will get a top-level navigation, a cross-site navigation element that gives you the ability to go from site to site and have that maintained at the top, a consistent cross-site navigation element. Once you start publishing news, like I showed you how to create news and how you can then experience it on SharePoint Mobile, the news from those different team sites, once they're associated to the hub, will then start to roll up to the hub. So we'll get a rich set of news coming across from all the teams, represented in the similar news web part, but a news web part that then is showing a lot of news from those different team sites. We also scope the search aspect. So if you're searching from the hub home, you're actually going to then search across all of those sites that have been associated to the hub, but not necessarily doing a full enterprise-wide search. So it's really got a nice scoping on how these sites and people are related and how they're working together. They're only going to find content within that hub or from those associated sites that have been connected to that hub. There's also going to be a consistent look and feel. So if you want to rationalize a number of different teams and their team sites so that they all look the same and have the same theme, when you associate it to a hub, it will inherit the theme from the hub site and get a consistent look and feel as people click from site to site. It's important to note that hub sites are to be created by admins, but then leveraged by site owners and of course experienced by everybody as they click around to have that nice experience. Set it up with IT, then really run and do business from a team level and be empowered to get work done, but in a connected fashion, in a more consistent way to organize your business, to organize your people, your projects, your regions. Whatever makes sense, it's going to be important that you will have a lot of hub sites and, of course, that you can associate a lot of sites under them and to be able to organize your intranet in a much more meaningful way. Looking at Roadmap, a lot of things actually that I've talked through are in production today. You can go try them. You can download the SharePoint app and see what it looks like to work on your team site, to be able to access the content, to be able to read news on the go. From the SharePoint home, to be able to click Create Site, to create a new team site, to be able to add members. You can do that. Choose your themes. If you want to create a custom theme, you can certainly do that. Some of the things that we're working on, if you've been using SharePoint for a while, we're working on bringing the ability to connect an existing site to a new Office 365 group that makes the site more modern and gives really the experience of what I demoed today. But it's a reality that a lot of these sites have been in existence for years, and we want, if you want to be able to bring those into a more connected experience and a much more modern experience. We also want to give a lot more insights in terms of what's happening in the site itself. So if you think about usage information, what are people doing in the site? To be able to do that at the site level, the page level, and over time to look at that across sites as well of what you can do in the Office 365 Admin Center to report on and see what's effective, what's not, to be able to bring those things through. So we've launched a number of these things since we originally disclosed and announced them. We're working in the next couple of months to bring a lot of additional features or to finalize what we've announced. And we've got a whole host of new information coming at the SharePoint conference, at Ignite later this year, and of course throughout the Tech Summits we'll keep you up to date. And with that, Thank you for joining today. This has been a deeper dive into how you can share and work together with SharePoint team sites, how they're connected with the membership of Office 365 groups, and really experience throughout the different applications like Microsoft Teams, how it plays into providing content to Yammer, to Planner, and how we can bring those experiences into the rich canvas of SharePoint. I hope that was helpful to give you a sense of what SharePoint is in the context of Office 365. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Microsoft, to ask your local representative, to talk to people, to talk to the community. Go to the Microsoft Tech community, ask questions. We're here to provide clarity, and we hope that you can be as productive as you can throughout the different phases of the year with the different team members of your team. And of course, when it comes to the content, we want it to be easy to work with, easy to share, easy to manage. So thanks for your time.